we go. Here we go. I'm just done. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna start going then. Is everyone good?
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. So the topic for presentation today is going to be e-voting and some of the risks and some of the benefits associated with it. First of all, we're going to go through some background knowledge and talk about what e-voting is and what we mean by that. E-voting is any type of voting that uses electronic means to cast or record votes in general. There are two types of e-voting that we're going to be talking about today. There's electronic voting, also called e-voting, which is voting that is supervised by someone, a representative of the government. And this includes things like electronic voting machines at a polling location, which you go up to and digitally submit your ballot. And then there's remote e-voting, which is called i-voting. And that's what people think of when you say e-voting a lot of times. It's voting online, using an app over the internet, stuff like that. And it's any time that a voter submits their vote remotely from any location they want to. Across the board, are there standards for e-voting? Generally, the answer is no. There is something called the Election Assistance Committee, or the EAC, which is an independent government agency that sets out a kind of voluntary guidelines that states can follow regarding e-voting, but generally every state kind of does what it wants, which is what it does for normal voting too. So each state has a different set of rules, which makes things a little bit confusing. The federal government could decide to make just a general rule for everybody, but they haven't done that. It's in the Constitution that they can if they want to, but across the board, that has never really happened. What security measures are there? So e-voting security measures are really dependent on the state which they are in or the company that provided the service. So if you're looking at an e-voting machine, which is like a physical thing that you use either to count the ballots or to actually vote in, it's really dependent on the company who made the machine. They're the ones who are in charge of making sure that the machines work, but they don't check after if the machine's being used and if it's been tampered with. States would be the ones in charge of that, people at the actual polling locations, but typically there's not really any sorts of checks that go on. There are like small checks to make sure that like an optical scanner is working correctly, but there's no checks to make sure it hasn't been hacked or anything like that. For i-voting, security is developed by the company who creates the software. So this is like somebody who makes an app or a big company that makes like a verification software. And across the board, these companies say that their products are very secure, but we don't really have access to what tests they do. And across the board, these have all been found vulnerable by third parties or private individuals in some way. They've been found successful to hacking or being tampered with the votes across the board. So now we're going to talk about some of the advantages of e-voting.
All right, so what are the advantages of e-voting? The first advantage is that we can combat voter suppression. Right now, many people are being hurt by voter suppression measures like cuts to early voting, voter ID laws, and purges of voter rolls. Online voting could make those measures irrelevant by letting everyone cast a vote online on the day of an election. The second advantage would be a higher voter turnout. Currently, in the United States, many people choose not to vote at all in elections for a variety of reasons. Voting online would encourage more people to vote by making it much faster and easier process. Instead of waiting in a line to vote, potentially for hours, anyone could vote at their convenience throughout the day. The third advantage would be it saves the state money. For each election, states have to spend money on poll workers. Advanced voting, mail-in ballots, and day of voting all cost the state a lot of money. If online voting were to be adopted, states would save money on poll workers, printing, and counting the ballots. The next advantage would be faster results. This recent presidential election showed just how long it can take to announce the results of in-person or mail-in ballots, With online voting, states would know the results much faster, most likely the day of, with less need for any recounts. The next advantage would be less negatives of in-person voting. Right now, it is important for government to help stop the spread of disease in any way possible. Online voting would eliminate the need for large groups of people to gather to vote, which would be much safer. This could help lessen the spread of the flu or other diseases even after COVID is over. It would also help people have trouble getting to a polling place, like a disabled person or elderly people.
Yeah, and that just are some of the advantages. And then next we're going to talk about the disadvantages of electronic voting.
Yeah. So, what are the disadvantages of electronic voting? So, there's a lack of infrastructure. If states were to switch to only e-voting or i-voting, they would need to purchase massive amounts of infrastructure. Um, they would need new electronic machines. They would need servers to support i-voting. They would need to develop software to collect votes, and they would need to get internet in rural locations, which can be difficult at times. All of this is very expensive and not worth the money when we have systems like mail-in ballots that work much better, and we've been using them for years and years um, in the past. It's also a waste of money. So all of the money that would need to go to e-voting is money that the states most likely do not have, and money that could be spent in much better ways. Instead of transitioning to i-voting, states could make election days a holiday, so people do not need to worry about getting time off. Or they could spend the money on the public school system and help high schoolers sign up to vote and educate them on the candidates. Another advantage or disadvantage is the exclusion of rural or computer illiterate voters. So switching to online voting only would exclude many voters in the U.S. who do not have internet connection or are computer illiterate. It would make it harder for elderly people to vote and would overall lessen the success of democracy. There's also voter suppression. Online voting would most likely require a photo ID for verification, but about 15% of the US population does not have a driver's license, which would be an issue. They're generally low income individuals, so switching to online voting would exclude them from the voting process completely. And also, I'm going to add that the online voting, um, like I said, we have not used it too much in the past. There is currently some dispute going on about the online voting, whether it's true or not. It just brings up kind of an unnecessary argument that can be solved rather fairly easily with getting rid of it. So another disadvantage is the security risks. The biggest issue with online voting is that it's just not secure right now. Like I was talking about, there's no way for the government to have an online system that can protect a person's votes while keeping it anonymous. They cannot know if a vote has been tampered with or changed, and there's no way to protect that from happening. Additionally, many voters could vote from a compromised computer or smartphone without ever knowing, and they would have no real to check that their device is safe. E-voting machines have similar issues. Direct recording electronic or DRE voting systems, which is a machine where a user puts in their vote digitally, and they've been found very hard to use and very easy to hack. Voters report their vote being changed, and most voters do not trust them to work. Whistleblowers at companies who make the machines have reported that they are not secure to use at all.
So then next we're going to talk about some of the takeaways overall and some of the opinions we have about online voting.
So is e-voting widely used in the United States? For e-voting, many states have adopted machines that will digitally read a physical ballot, and a few states have started using direct recording electronic systems like we just talked about, but they're not widely used. Overall, people do not trust these machines and do not feel comfortable using them. I-voting, that's something that's currently being used in specific cases. It's widely used for military personnel, and other people who are overseas, basically people who can't really vote in person or send a paper ballot. So they receive their ballot electronically, then they can email or fax the ballot back or vote electronically, depending on their state's requirements. So it kind of varies.
Do you feel comfortable using e-voting? Overall, I think physical ballots are better than e-voting DRE systems. There have been many cases of e-voting machines malfunctioning or being hard to use, and the lack of a physical ballot that can be recounted later makes me very uncomfortable. One issue I have is that voting machines are made by companies whose goal is just to make money for them. Many of these companies have shut down or gone bankrupt, which makes it very hard for me to trust any of them. I am much more comfortable with machines that just count a physical ballot. This way, there's still a physical ballot.
All right, and then one of the last questions is, do you feel comfortable voting online? So personally, I don't think online voting as it is now is safe or feasible at all. There's no way for the government or any company that makes the software for us to protect our votes from interference. Just the way that the internet works with it connecting to servers all over the place, with not knowing where your vote is going to really go through to get to the place it needs to get. And a user cannot know for sure that their device is safe to work with and vote with. They don't know if their computer's been compromised. They don't know if their phone's been compromised. And most people aren't good enough with computers to be able to check that. And after they vote, they can't check if the vote has gone through correctly because of issues with the vote being anonymous. Um, so personally, I will not be comfortable using online voting for a very long time, and probably never, honestly. And the last question is, will online voting ever become the norm? Overall, I don't think it's going to happen, which I know is what a lot of people said of stuff like the internet back in the day. But just as the way that things function right now, I don't think could ever happen safely. Um, Mail-in ballots across the board address almost all of the same issues as voting online says it'll solve, which mail-in ballots are one of the ways that a lot of people voted in this last election, and it went fine, except for issues with the vote taking a long time to count. And mail-in ballots don't have any of the risks that voting online does when it comes to stuff like fraud or vote being hacked in any way. But like I said, technology evolves really fast now. So maybe in 10 or 20 years, online voting becomes the thing that we all go to. Maybe it becomes safe and good to do. But I think that also physical ballots play a really important role, and that they shouldn't ever be taken rid of completely, because of how much it would disenfranchise some of the voters and really hurt them. So across the board, I think states need to consider all of their voters before they make any big changes. And yeah, that's the e-voting presentation. Thank you.